Welcome back to another edition of Literary Diss Tracks, where today we have two authors whom politicians love to reference despite very clearly never having read them. Namely, Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, and George Orwell, author of 1984. As we'll see, these two writers very politely disagreed on what this world's dystopia would one day look like, but their differing visions of dystopia are eerily prescient to the world we are living now, especially those of us living in the US. We might characterize their difference as the following. Will a dystopian totalitarian rule appear by brute force, suppressing truth in favor of unwavering political ideology? Or will it appear suddenly and under the cover of our own distraction, preaching this gospel of efficiency? Please, I'd love for you all to weigh in at the end with your thoughts. Oh, and pre-order my new novel that comes out next month, Her New Eyes. I suppose you could say it's dystopian, but really it's about a 68-year-old woman who starts transforming into Marilyn Monroe, and it just gets weirder from there. So in 1917, Aldous Huxley took a job teaching French at Eton College. Known for being incredibly gifted in language, but somewhat incompetent as a classroom facilitator, he only lasted a year. Shortly thereafter, he would take a job at a chemical plant in northeast England where he'd witness firsthand principles of Fordist mass production that would play a role in his 1932 novel, Brave New World, a novel that takes place in the year 2540. Citizens are engineered and indoctrinated into different classes based on intellect and their labor value, but their political and economic subjugation is enabled by both mass Pavlovian conditioning and this proliferation of a happiness-inducing drug. So in other words, Huxley's dystopia envisions this scientifically irresponsible world where power is aggregated at the top by keeping those below in a state of distraction and hedonistic pleasure, promoting a kind of subjugation that is not recognized as subjugation, but a simple matter of the way things are, or even worse, a willful choice. During Huxley's time teaching French at Eton College, he had a young pupil by the name of Eric Blair, who would go on to take the pen name George Orwell. Orwell's biography is pretty fascinating, but suffice to say that 4 years after his novel Animal Farm in 1945, he followed it up with his novel 1984. Both novels are very plainly interested in critiquing these tides of totalitarianism and fascism, but in the novel 1984, Orwell paints a very bleak dystopia, one where this totalitarian regime rules not by making its citizens docile, as is the case with A Brave New World, but instead it rules by violence and censorship and surveillance with inventions that stick to our lexicon to this day, such as Big Brother and the Thought Police. George Orwell arranged for his publisher to send his old teacher and fellow satirist Aldous Huxley a copy of the novel, which was receiving rave reviews at the time. In return, Orwell received a letter that he was almost certainly expecting to be, again, another rave review, but it was more tepid. While Huxley praises his pupil's novel as being, quote, profoundly important, he also takes the time, as any good true educator would, to point out what he views as some important philosophical distinctions between their work and society at large. So, writing on the totalitarian regime depicted in 1984, again, whose power lies in suppression and censorship, Huxley writes, quote, "Whether in actual fact the policy of the boot on the face can go on indefinitely seems doubtful. My own belief is that the ruling oligarchy will find less arduous and wasteful ways of governing and of satisfying its lust for power, and these ways will resemble those which I described in Brave New World." He continues, quote, "Within the next generation, I believe that the world's rulers will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. In other words, I feel that the nightmare of 1984 is destined to modulate into the nightmare of a world having more resemblance to that which I imagined in Brave New World. The change will be brought about as a result of a felt need for increased efficiency. Meanwhile, of course, there will be a large-scale biological and atomic war, in which case we shall have nightmares of other and scarcely imaginable kinds." Now, It really isn't hard to trace Huxley's letter to Orwell, its warning of tricking people into loving their servitude and the fact that their dystopia arises from a need for increased efficiency. It's not hard to trace that into the present moment. I'll let you all hash that out in the comments, but what I really want to emphasize here is that what Huxley is viewing as binary in this letter. So this, either totalitarian rule operates on conditioned subjugation or brute force. This binary likely isn't one. Actually, I don't need to hedge. It definitely is not. The proof is all around us. You've got Trump, a would-be and probably soon-to-be totalitarian ruler whose campaign created this cult of personality whereby his working-class supporters are fooled into subjugation, worshiping at the feet of these billionaires who are only billionaires because they stomp on those working people like grapes. If he can condition them to do that, well, he can condition their belief to do whatever he says. Meanwhile, he does rule by recognizable brute force, censoring and surveilling ideas that run contrary to his own political gospel. I look at Trump's recent executive order. It's very Orwellian in title. It's called, quote, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, in which he demands oversight of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, particularly what he calls its, quote, divisive, race-centered ideology. So what is this divisive, race-centered ideology? Well, among them, according to Trump, is the museum's statement that race is a social construct and not a biological fact, meaning Trump wants to promote widely debunked centuries-old claims of racial essentialism, which, as you might guess, is a short walk to a dark road. So on the one hand, you have this forced censorship of history, particularly Black history, in the service of white supremacy. And on the other hand, you have those supporters who view this not as intellectual or cultural subjugation, but as freedom. Freedom from wokeness, freedom from insanity, and shockingly, inexplicably, unbelievably, freedom from the thought police.